We've explored the deepest trenches of the ocean and even sent humans to space, yet some of the strangest stories on Earth still leave scientists speechless. Stories where a simple dare turns into an unsolved mystery, where logic collides with fear, and where the human mind does things we still can't explain. Today, we're diving into real-life events that began as harmless games and ended as chilling scientific enigmas. From the physics of survival to the psychology of peer pressure, each story reveals something deeper about how fragile, unpredictable, and fascinating the human brain truly is. Let's start with a story that spread across every corner of the internet, a moment caught on camera that still baffles both scientists and investigators. On May 24, 2023, 18-year-old Cameron Robbins had just graduated high school in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was celebrating with hundreds of classmates on a trip to the Bahamas, a trip that was supposed to mark the beginning of his adult life. The group stayed at the luxurious Atlantis Paradise Island resort, known for its coral towers and aquariums filled with sharks and rays. That night, they boarded Blackbeard's Revenge, a pirate-themed party cruise that glowed with neon lights and laughter. Music echoed across the water. Then around 9:40 p.m., as the ship drifted near uninhabited Athol Island, someone dared Cameron to jump into the dark ocean below. Several friends tried to stop him. They shouted, grabbed his arm, warned him, but he broke free. In a moment that seemed impulsive and invincible, Cameron leapt into the black water. The video that surfaced later shows him swimming, illuminated by the boat's dim lights. Someone threw a life preserver, yelling, "Grab the boy!" But Cameron didn't. Instead, he appeared to swim away almost as if something unseen drew him farther into the darkness. Within seconds, he vanished. Search teams from the US Coast Guard and the Royal Bahamas Defense Force scoured over 325 miles of shark-infested waters, but no trace was ever found. Officials suggested alcohol and panic played a role, but oceanographers pointed to something more complex: disorientation from sensory deprivation. In total darkness with no land, no horizon, and waves shifting beneath you, the human brain can lose its sense of direction in seconds. It's called marine spatial disorientation, and it can cause a person to swim away from safety without realizing it. Cameron's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it was a haunting reminder of how fragile perception becomes when stripped of light and stability. Even today, marine biologists use his case to discuss how fear, darkness, and alcohol can override survival instincts. And if you think that story's unsettling, wait until you hear the next one, where a teenager's secret confession unraveled a mystery darker than anyone imagined. Some mysteries hide in the ocean, others hide inside the human mind. In May 2018, a quiet English town called Heysham, Lancashire, woke to tragedy. At 94 years old, Mary Gregory was found unconscious in her bungalow after a fire broke out in the early hours of the morning. Firefighters pulled her from the smoke, and though they fought to save her, she passed away 4 days later. The case seemed simple. Investigators concluded the fire had been caused by a dropped cigarette. Mary was elderly, had dementia, and had been known to smoke, a heartbreaking but accidental death. The town mourned, the case was closed, and life went on. Until weeks later, a teenager's strange confession cracked everything open. During a casual game of Truth or Dare, 17-year-old Tiernan Darnton told his friends, "I have a secret I haven't told anyone. I think I killed someone." They laughed it off, assuming it was some edgy joke. But Tiernan wasn't joking. A year later, during a counseling session, he said something that made the therapist freeze. "My friend could send me to prison because of what he knows." When asked directly if he had killed someone, he silently mouthed yes. Police reopened the investigation, and what they found was chilling. Hidden in Tiernan's drawings were detailed floor plans of Mary Gregory's house, complete with notes like "good hiding place" and "quick exit." He had unplugged the phone, disabled the smoke alarm, and blocked the conservatory doors before setting the fire. Investigators discovered he'd been obsessed with crime stories and had searched online for things like "how long do murderers serve in prison?" In November 2021, Tiernan was convicted of murder and sentenced to life. But what stunned psychologists wasn't just the crime, it was why he confessed. Experts from Cambridge noted that some young offenders reveal their crimes out of an unconscious need for punishment, a twisted form of relief. It's known as moral leakage when guilt overcomes self-preservation. The mind, desperate for balance, betrays itself. Mary's case became a grim study in forensic psychology. How guilt can rot in silence. How truth sometimes claws its way out even through a casual teenage game. And just when you think dares can't get deadlier, our next story shows how peer pressure technology and teenage thrill-seeking collided in a way that still haunts one American community. On a humid summer afternoon in 2024, two South Carolina teenagers, just 15 and 16, joined a group chat full of their friends. It started like so many others do: jokes, memes, and dares. The challenge this time, jumping off a bridge into Lake Hartwell. The idea sounded simple, even funny. Everyone egged each other on, typing messages like, "You won't do it," and "Come on, be brave." The dopamine rush of peer approval is real. Neuroscientists at MIT have found that teenage brains process risk differently, especially when peers are watching. To an adult, that leap looks reckless. To a teen, it feels like a ticket to belonging. So the two friends drove to the bridge. The sun was setting, the water shimmered below. They climbed the railing, phones recording, hearts pounding. Then they jumped. Seconds passed. The crowd waited for laughter, for splashes. But neither teen resurfaced. Panic replaced excitement. The phones stopped recording. Within minutes, emergency calls went out. Divers searched through the murky lake as parents and friends stood by the shore praying. Hours later, both bodies were found. No one had realized how cold, deep, and deceptive Lake Hartwell could be. At dusk, its currents pulled downward near the bridge supports a silent hazard, invisible from above. In the days that followed, the tragedy became national news. Parents gathered for candlelight vigils, holding photos, whispering prayers. But psychologists and educators saw something else. A tragic case study in digital peer pressure, the kind that amplifies risk through the illusion of safety. Social scientists call it the online disinhibition effect, where the screen numbs empathy and multiplies dares. Experts from the American Psychological Association have linked such tragedies to the modern feedback loop of likes and challenges. In experiments, they found teens take up to 3 times more physical risks when watched by peers, even virtually. The brain's prefrontal cortex, the center of judgment, is still under construction at that age, meaning fear loses its grip faster than it should. In the end, the bridge became a memorial, flowers taped to the railing, handwritten notes reading, "Think before you leap." It's now more than a local tragedy. It's a symbol of how technology can magnify the most fragile parts of human nature. And as heartbreaking as this story is, the next one takes us from the world of teenage thrill-seeking into the raw unpredictability of childhood curiosity, where a dare involving boiling water revealed just how unprepared the human body can be for a single fatal mistake. March 22nd, 2017. A sleepover in Florida. A group of kids playing truth or dare. Nothing unusual, until one dare crossed the line between childish curiosity and fatal consequence. 8-year-old Kahari Pope was bright, funny, and fearless, the kind of kid who wanted to prove she could handle any challenge. When someone dared her to drink boiling water through a straw, she didn't hesitate. It sounds absurd, impossible even. But that's the dangerous thing about the psychology of dares: they bypass logic with emotion. The other children laughed, waiting to see if she'd actually do it. She did. Within seconds, she screamed in agony. The scalding liquid burned her mouth, throat, and lungs. Adults rushed in, panicked, and she was taken to the hospital. Doctors soon realized the damage was catastrophic. The boiling water had seared through her airway, causing internal burns that made it nearly impossible to breathe. Over the next few months, Kihari endured surgeries, machines, and tubes, but her small body couldn't recover. 4 months later, she passed away. It was one of the most disturbing cautionary tales of the decade, a moment that rippled across social media and classrooms nationwide. Parents and teachers suddenly found themselves explaining why boiling water wasn't just hot. It was lethal. Physiologists explained that the human airway isn't built to handle extreme heat. At just 150 degrees Celsius, 65 degrees, tissues start to break down. Boiling water is 212 degrees, 100 degrees. That's enough to burn through the lining of the trachea almost instantly. The damage isn't visible like a skin burn. It's internal, silent, and irreversible. Scientists at Johns Hopkins used this tragedy to highlight how children's brains interpret risk. Unlike adults, the prefrontal cortex, the part that measures danger, is still developing. Add peer laughter and social reward, and their decision-making skews toward action over caution. It's why so many kid dares evolve from innocent to deadly in seconds. Kihari's family later spoke publicly, turning their grief into awareness. They visited schools, sharing her story to stop others from making the same mistake. Educators began using her case in child psychology seminars, not just as a warning, but as a window into the neuroscience of risk-taking. Her story remains heartbreaking, but it reveals something profound about human nature. The same drive that fuels courage, exploration, and creativity can, without understanding, lead straight into tragedy. And while Kihari's story centers on the dangers of heat, Our next one takes us to the other end of the biological spectrum, a story that shows how one tiny creature can rewrite the rules of life, death, and the human brain itself. It started as a joke, one of those late-night wine-fueled dares that seem funny in the moment. In 2010, 19-year-old Sam Ballard, a rugby player from Sydney, Australia, was hanging out with friends in a backyard when someone noticed a slug crawling across the patio. "Bet you won't eat it," someone laughed. Sam did. He picked up the slug and swallowed it whole. His friends cheered, and the moment passed, just another reckless story to tell later. But within days, Sam began to feel strange. His legs ached, his vision blurred, and soon he couldn't move. Doctors discovered the horrifying truth: the slug carried a rat lungworm, a parasite known scientifically as Angiostrongylis cantonensis. It's common in rodents and can infect snails and slugs. When accidentally consumed, it can invade the human nervous system, causing eosinophilic meningoencephalitis, a rare, often fatal brain infection. Sam fell into a coma that lasted 420 days. When he finally woke up, he was paralyzed from the neck down, a quadriplegic. For 8 years, he lived with severe disabilities, unable to walk or feed himself. His mother became his full-time caregiver. In 2018, Sam passed away from complications related to the infection. To this day, parasitologists use Sam's story as a devastating example of how delicate the human body truly is. Just one microscopic organism can infiltrate the brain, cross the blood-brain barrier, and destroy its delicate architecture. What's fascinating and haunting is how this case reshaped medical awareness. Researchers from the University of Sydney began studying how such parasites survive inside the human nervous system. They found that Angiostrongylis releases neurotoxic proteins that hijack the immune system's defenses, essentially tricking it into sparing the invader. Sam's tragedy sparked public health campaigns warning against eating raw garden produce or handling snails and slugs without washing hands. Even NASA later referenced his case in a study on microbial survival, because understanding how parasites endure extreme environments could help scientists prepare for contamination risks on Mars missions. What began as a dare turned into a global lesson: the smallest creatures on Earth can wield the greatest power over life itself. And as shocking as that is, the next story takes explosive risk to a whole new level, quite literally. Because when alcohol, fireworks, and human pride mix together, physics itself becomes the weapon. It was October 24, 2024. The Festival of Lights Diwali in Bengaluru, India. Streets glowed with lanterns, fireworks cracked through the night sky, and joy echoed everywhere. Among the celebration, a group of friends gathered in a courtyard. Laughter spilling over drinks and dares. Someone wheeled out a massive box of fireworks, the kind designed for professional displays. Then, as alcohol dulled reason and adrenaline took over, a reckless idea was born: bet you won't sit on it while we light it. The man, 32 years old, confident, maybe trying to make his friends laugh, accepted. Cameras rolled. He climbed onto the box, sitting cross-legged as sparks flickered below. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, everything exploded. The blast was instantaneous, the air filled with fire and shockwaves. The man was thrown several meters into the air, the explosion lighting up the night like a bomb. Friends screamed and rushed toward him, but it was already too late. The explosion had caused fatal injuries. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but there was nothing to be done. In the aftermath, the story swept through Indian news networks and social media. Not just as another tragic accident, but as an example of how physics, chemistry, and human impulse collide. Fireworks are made with a mix of oxidizers, fuel, and binders. Compounds like potassium nitrate and sulfur, that when ignited rapidly convert stored chemical energy into explosive gas. Sitting on such a device isn't just dangerous, it's the equivalent of sitting on several small grenades. Experts from the Indian Institute of Science later used the footage to teach about blast dynamics. The explosion produced thousands of pounds of force per square inch, more than enough to cause internal ruptures, even without visible burns. What's more fascinating, according to human behavior studies, is how group intoxication distorts perception. Neuroscientists call this the risk mirroring effect. When people drink in groups, their brains subconsciously calibrate to the boldest person's behavior. In short, one person's bad idea becomes everyone's idea. After the incident, authorities launched public campaigns during Diwali, urging citizens to celebrate light, not risk. The man's family spoke out, devastated, but determined that his death serve as a warning not against fireworks, but against ego-fueled dares. And while this tragedy involved combustion and chaos, the next one was born from something far more modern: a viral stunt spreading across TikTok, where physics met speed and a simple folding table became a death trap. From a jump into the dark Bahamian Sea to a teenage confession that cracked a murder case wide open, each of these stories began with the same simple spark, a dare, a challenge. A moment of curiosity or courage that crossed a line. Cameron Robbins vanished into Blackwater disoriented by fear and sensory confusion. Tien and Danton's conscience betrayed him, revealing a crime he could no longer bear. Two teenagers lost their lives chasing a thrill from a phone screen. A little girl learned too late that even heat obeys no mercy. A slug turned into a microscopic assassin. A Diwali celebration became an explosion of physics and pride. A TikTok stunt blurred the line between fun and fatal. And a high school game ended with the kind of silence that only loss can bring. When you lay them side by side, it's easy to see a pattern not of stupidity but of humanity. Every one of these people acted on something ancient inside us, the need to belong, to feel alive, to test the unknown. Psychologists call it the curiosity drive, and it's the same force that once pushed humans to sail beyond maps, to split the atom, to walk on the moon. But curiosity without caution is like energy without control. Powerful, unpredictable and dangerous. Maybe that's the paradox of being human. The same brain that dreams, explores and invents is also the one that dares sometimes too far. Science can explain how neurons misfire, how hormones flood our systems, or how perception warps under pressure. But it still can't fully explain why we're drawn to the edge in the first place. And maybe that's what makes us who we are. Creatures driven not just to survive, but to understand the unknown, even if it means risking everything to touch it. So next time you see a dare, a trend, or a thrill that seems harmless, pause and ask, is this curiosity or chaos? Because sometimes the greatest mystery isn't out there in the universe, it's right here in the choices we make. If you love exploring stories where science meets the human condition, the weird, the tragic, the unbelievable, make sure to subscribe. Because every week we uncover another mystery that proves one truth: the world is still far stranger than we think.